Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the CGP workshop. This is available for the fall 2021 cycle here at the Denver Foundation. We're excited to share with you some updates about our grants process and also give you time to ask us any questions that you might have. There are closed caption and subtitles available of the meeting. If you would like to use it, please click the bottom right button on the bottom right hand corner of your Zoom screen and select Show Subtitles. You may also choose to show the full transcript. Guests will be muted for the presentation, but you are welcome to submit questions via the chat box. We will answer questions at the end of this session and get to as many as we can. Any that we are unable to get to will be answered in the follow-up email to this meeting. The follow-up email will include the slide deck as well as the recording of this presentation and additional sources. This email will be sent to everyone who registered for the workshop today, whether or not they were able to attend. With that, I welcome you once more and hand it over to Dace.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Again, my name is Dace West. I'm the Chief Impact Officer here at the Foundation. And if you're wondering what a Chief Impact Officer is, I lead the department within the Foundation that conducts all of our grant making, our scholarships work, our resident engagement, our capacity building, as well as our donor services, philanthropic support, and fundraising. So we're really excited to have you here as a whole department. And you just heard from Genevieve Lacca, who's our Director of Engaged Philanthropy and really critical in the piece that we'll be talking about today, which is the Community Grants Program. So let's get into it and let's discuss what it will look like to apply and to engage with community grants with the Denver Foundation in this August cycle. This year, the Community Grants Program looks a little different than it has looked in previous years, and that's because the Denver Foundation just went through the process of developing a new strategic framework. We rolled that framework out in February of this year, and it was really informed by data and information from over 8,000 community participants who provided their feedback about the needs and the challenges in the Metro Denver area. So what you're hearing in today's presentation really comes from those community conversations and the things that were uplifted as a part of that dialogue. The Community Grants Program is one of the grant programs that's discretionary to the Foundation. It's funded by the Foundation's endowment, and it makes up about 5% of the Foundation's grant making. So we fund approximately $2 million, a little over, in each of our grant rounds that happen in the spring and the fall, and this is the fall grant round. You'll see on the screen that it indicates that our average grant size ranges from $20,000 to $50,000. For those of you who've been engaged with the Denver Foundation in the past, you'll note that that is a little bit larger than the grant size that we've had in the past, which has been closer to $18,000. And that's really based on your feedback as organizations talking to us and telling us that you would be able to have more impact in the community if you were able to garner larger grant sizes. So we really heard that and are taking that into account over the course of this grant round. So let's get into the details of what we fund. Again, this is based on the work of the strategic framework. And we're really excited about these priority areas. Some of them look exactly the same as what you've seen before, and some of them are markedly different. So let's start with economic opportunity. This is an area that's just the same as what you're used to seeing. We're continuing to fund community wealth building, so entrepreneurship, development of small businesses, particularly in BIPOC communities, as well as workforce development. In education, continuing to fund K-12 reforms with a focus on racial equity. So those are things like the school to prison pipeline work that the Denver Foundation has funded for many years. That systems change work in a school district, as well as school funding and school finance, which is a little bit different for the foundation and a little bit newer. Another newer area is environment and climate, with a focus on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and air quality. So we're excited to see what comes in that space. All of you who live in this community can imagine that housing really came up as one of the top, actually the top issue that you asked us to address and to continue to invest in. So a focus on affordable housing, with a particular focus on those in the lowest income bracket, 0 to 30 area median income, as well as homelessness. And finally, transportation, another new one for us, with a particular focus on public transit, accessibility, and affordability. I think it's important to note that we are, let's see, I'm having trouble forwarding my slides. Stop the share and try it again. There we go. I think it's important to note that we are really focused on community-led and community-driven solutions. So you may have questions under each of those areas. Is this particular piece that I'm working on, does that match what you're looking for? Do you have a theory of change, and are you working towards that? And our theory of change is really that the best solutions come up from the community, and that your community ought to be telling you and driving the work that you're doing. So in each of those areas, we really want you to think about what is your constituency saying to you, and really what are the constituent driven and constituent led solutions that will further the work.
Dace, it looks like you're on mute.
Thank you. The criteria that we're assessing your organization by look a little bit different in terms of importance, where we're placing the importance. The area that is most critical for us really rests in our core values as an organization. Our board really affirmed for us as part of our strategic framework that both racial equity and constituent leadership were the core values of the Denver Foundation, and that all of our work would really drive in the direction of organizations that were engaged in work that furthered racial equity, and that lifted up work that was constituent led. We'll be looking at those two criteria as our first pass. So you're going to want to make sure that you're paying close attention. We'll talk about the questions in just a moment. You'll want to make sure that you're paying close attention to the questions about core values. Those will be the first area that we'll be looking at as a part of the review process. The second area that we'll look at is alignment with our priority areas. So those areas that I just described. Again, looking for those constituent-driven solutions in each of those areas. And then the third is organizational health, some of your financial stability, those kinds of things. You do need to register on our online portal. We ask that you register at least 4 days before August 2nd, because it does take a little bit of time before we're able to enable your account in the system. But I would really encourage, even if you're just thinking about applying today, to go online and to register. That way you just have it done and it's out of the way, and you don't have to stress about it towards the end, when you're also potentially working on the content of the application. Something else that's really important is that you can save your application in our system and you can return to it later. So if you want to do a pass and come back to it after you've had a chance to rest, or you need to get some more information, you don't have to start the application over, or write it all out in Word and then translate it over into our system. And the foundation's application has 3 areas: kind of general information, core values, and then your proposal details. So the general questions are what you would expect. They're the basics of how to get a hold of you. They want to know about whether you're in a fiscal sponsor relationship, and it's just fine if you are in a fiscal sponsor relationship. We welcome those kinds of relationships into our grant pool. And we don't ask you to submit a ton of information about your financials. So you won't see us ask you for your audit and for various P&Ls and balance sheets and financial statements. We're just asking you to explain to us what your financial situation is as an organization. And we'll use that as our opportunity to understand kind of the context. Then we move into our core values. The first question that we ask is about the way that your executive director or CEO identifies as it relates to race and ethnicity. We do prioritize organizations that are BIPOC led. We know that historically those organizations have received less funding and been funded less frequently than white led organizations. That doesn't mean if you're a white led organization that you should not apply. You should. We're interested in your applications as well, particularly if you're doing racial equity work yourself. We also ask the question about what percentage of your board identifies as BIPOC, as well as staff. These core value questions I mentioned earlier are extremely, extremely important. So you want to take time to really answer these thoroughly and thoughtfully. They ask about your constituent engagement and constituent-led processes, as well as your racial equity work. They ask what you're doing, both internally and externally, what challenges you're facing, what you're learning. They're really a place for us to get to know your organization as it relates to the things that are important to our organization. And then this last part, hopefully you'll see with some relief that we've moved away from the Colorado Common Grant application, which you told us was really too long and too much for the level of funding that we were providing to you as organizations. So just a few kind of, basic questions, whether you're asking for general operating support or program support. I would note here that the Denver Foundation has a strong preference around general operating support. So please ask for general operating support unless there's some very specific reason that you can't. For example, you're a statewide organization and we only fund in the 7-county metro area, so you need program support because of that geographic restriction or something along those lines. Otherwise, we really want to fund general operating. We know that that's better money and it's what organizations need. And then we just ask you for a few questions, really generally, who are you as an organization? What's your mission and your programs? If there's a program that has a really tight fit with what we're prioritizing in our issue areas, talk a little bit about that. And then how you determine success. What does that look like? What are you proud of? Those are the things that we want to hear from you and that we love to read about. We also ask you if we have the opportunity to share your information with our donor advised fund holders who do lots of grant making all around the metro area and in fact around the state. Would you allow for that to be the case? And we're looking for opportunities to make those relationships even closer. So would love it if you said yes to that. That would help some of our goals as an organization as well. So just a little bit about the timeline. You see we've moved along. We are right in the midst of our July pre-application workshop. And the application closes on August 2nd at 5 p.m. Please pay attention to that timeline. It does close right at 5 o'clock. So, again, the earlier that you can do this work and the earlier that you can get your application in, the better. It just creates less stress on the back end. Our committee will be reviewing then at that point. Our committee is a combination of our staff, who I'll highlight in just a moment, as well as members of our advisory committee for community impact, which is a group of community members who represent a whole variety of TDF stakeholders and are reading alongside, deliberating, and making decisions about the grant proposals. So we're really excited to have them with us in this process this year. And then you'll notice that the notification is also sooner than what you may have experienced in the past. Typically, we had come in closer to year end, but if you're taking a look at your cash flow projections, you can expect to hear from us by mid-October, and that'll be a little bit earlier time in the year. So we're here to support you. In addition to this workshop, we're really happy to have conversations with you as you're putting your application together and thinking about that work. You saw pictures of me and Genevieve earlier. Kelly Purdy, who's our Vice President of Engaged Philanthropy, is also here as a host of today's session. And then we have a really amazing team who are working on each of the issue areas. Each of them have 2 issue areas that they're engaged in. Genevieve is also engaged in some of the issue area work as well. So Brandon, Emma, Robin, and Zach will be your primary points of contact. Emma is really taking a lead on helping make sure that kind of all of the wheels are turning in terms of us getting meetings on the calendar and making sure that you are connected with the right person. But we'll be sending this out along with email addresses after the session so that you know how to get a hold of us. And we really welcome you getting a hold of us. We really want to be in dialogue with you and engaging around your potential proposal. So here are those email addresses that I mentioned. You'll have these in your inbox and use them. We again really want to hear from you. So now we're going to go to questions. And I think Genevieve and I are going to do a little tag team on this portion.
We are indeed. So we have had some questions come in. Thank you all for submitting them. I thought we'd start with the more general information questions. The first one is around that staffing portion. So one of the questions is, if there is not a current CEO in the role, does that disqualify our organization from applying?
Absolutely not. I would assume that you're still doing the great work that you're doing in the community, regardless of whether you have, whether you're fully staffed up or not. So just indicate the primary point of contact where it suggests that you do that, and we'll go from there. We would not disqualify an organization for not having a CEO in place.
Great, thank you. The next question are grants exclusive to 501c3 organizations?
Yes.
Short and sweet, I love it. The next question is, are program officers available for more detailed conversations after this session?
Yes, absolutely. So those folks that I just pointed out, Zach, Emma, Brandon, Genevieve, and Robin are all available for conversations. I'm happy to talk with folks anytime. Kelly, I'm sure is happy to talk with folks anytime. We want you to be in touch with us. So please do reach out.
The next question is, how many grant applications are usually received and what percentage are typically funded, and will this continue this round?
Such a great question. Our typical rate in the past has been about 60% of applications being funded. In this grant round, I think it's a little bit of a wild card, right? We have new issue areas that we're focused on. We don't have a great sense of how many applications will come in across the 5 areas. So I think this round is going to be a test environment for us in terms of understanding what the range of applications are that may come in. I will say we don't have a particular amount of resource devoted to each issue area. So it's not like there's $200,000 devoted to transportation and $500,000 devoted to education. We're really going to be looking at the range of issue areas across all of our priorities and making a global determination about where those resources are going to go. So we'll be able to tell you a much better answer to that after we go through this round and have one of these under our belt.
Great. The next question is, if an organization applied in February, can they apply in this grant cycle?
Good question. No, at the Denver Foundation, we fund on an annual basis. And so if you applied in February, you'd be eligible to apply the next February. Even if you weren't a successful applicant in February, you would be eligible to apply the following February. So it's a 1-year application cycle.
Got it. And the next question we have is, we receive support from some of your other funds, such as donor advised funds. Does that change our eligibility for the CGP?
Not at all, not at all. I'll just be honest, our hope is that organizations have the ability to garner resources from all over the place at the Denver Foundation. So we would love to see you in CGP in addition to the support that you're getting from our generous donor advised fund holders.
The next question is the foundation's potential continued offering of technical assistance grants.
Just generally?
Yes, will we continue to provide them?
Yes, we will. We're just in the process of updating the guidelines right now, but we think that capacity building and technical assistance is a really critical piece of the Denver Foundation's support for the nonprofit community. As part of our strategic framework, we heard pretty loudly from folks that that was something that they valued and wanted to continue. And so for those of you who haven't been involved in our technical assistance program before, it's up to $6,000 every 6 months or longer that you can apply to receive support for a consultant to work with your organization on things ranging from strategic planning to financial management to REI work, all of those things. And so yes, absolutely. That will continue as a program, and you should see it go up on our site in relatively short order in the next month or two.
Great. Could you talk about the grant reporting process?
Sure. We invite organizations to submit a grant report along with their application. or at the end of their grant period if they're not applying at the end of, again, at the end of the year. To date, we have been using the Colorado Common Grant Report. We're in the process right now of taking a look at that and making some adjustments. We, as I mentioned in the application process, have really been thinking about what streamlining looks like and are really looking at what kind of information we actually need and would use. So that's something that's in a little bit of development right now, but we do ask you to share with us what's happened during the grant period. Some of that's for our learning and knowledge. Some of that's, so we understand kind of how your organization is working over the course of the grant period. And some of it is that it allows us to really lift up for our donors the great work that's happening across the nonprofit community and talk about the outcomes and outputs that our grantees are achieving.
Thank you. Can you talk about the largest grant amount possible, as well as any possibility for multi-year funding?
Yeah, good questions. So the average grant range that we're suggesting for this year that we're driving towards is $20,000 to $50,000. It's different for us to be giving a little bit larger grants. So there may be some that are above that $50,000 range, but I suspect there will not be many of those. And so, if you're thinking about what to ask for, I would ask in that range if that feels like what you need as an organization. Multi-year funding is something that the Denver Foundation is still not set up to do quite yet. But we did just receive permission from our board to take a look at moving into that space. Then we'll start experimenting with that in 2022. We know that in addition to general operating support, multi-year grants are the other thing that make a huge difference for organizations because you're just better able to plan, and it makes a difference in terms of how you staff up, all of those kinds of things. So we hope to be in that place, but we're not there in this grant round.
Thank you. Can you talk about the potential for grants under the Colorado Health Access Fund?
Colorado Health Access Fund is moving. It was a time-limited fund, so it set up by the donor to be spent down over a period of years, and we're coming to the end of that period of time for the Colorado Health Access Fund. We are continuing to make impact investments out of that fund, and that'll be something that we'll continue to recycle. So if you have a need for low interest loans, you have a capital project or something along those lines, we should have a conversation about the CHA funds.
Great, thank you. Can you elaborate on the number of applications you get during the spring versus summer cycle, if you have any recommendations of which one to pick, and are all priority areas eligible during both deadline cycles?
Great question. So we have not historically seen a difference in the spring and the fall cycles. They've been relatively equal in terms of the applications that have come in during each cycle. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't know, what the application portfolio is going to look like this year, and are eager to see all of your submissions. And yes, all of the issue areas are open at this point in both application cycles. So it's not like we're putting environment and housing in the spring and the rest of them in the fall. They'll all be available in both cycles.
Great. And one of our last general information questions, do we provide partial grants? For instance, if someone applies for 50, will we consider still awarding them at a lower level?
Yes, absolutely. And I suspect, just being very frank, I suspect that will end up being the case in a number of instances. We're trying to balance funding as many organizations as we can with funding organizations in meaningful ways. And so I think there will be times that you may ask for, say, a $50,000 grant, and we're not able to do that because of the balance. And so would still want to support your organization, but just couldn't do it at a full funding level.
And what about cooperatives that are not 501c3s, or if someone has a fiscal sponsor?
Fiscal sponsorships are just fine. If you have a cooperative, we should have a conversation. We have another program that's not our community grants program called Strengthening Neighborhoods, which provides support for a variety of different opportunities, different resident-led opportunities, and cooperatives have been something that we have funded out of that program. So David Portillo is the person that runs that program. You could reach out to me or to David directly, and we can just engage in some dialogue about what you're looking for.
Great. Moving into the priority areas and specific questions around that. There is a general appreciation for having general ops being pushed, but how does one look at the specific program areas that they might fit into while also asking for general operating support?
The way that I always did this when I was writing grants was, to think about the readers and their the way that I might draw a straight line for them to help them understand how my work fit the priorities that they're looking at. So even if you're not asking for an individual program, it helps our committee members, it helps our staff rather than painting only a broad picture of your organization, if you also just draw down and here's the straight line to what I'm talking about with community wealth building, or here's the straight line and what I'm talking about with transit. But the request still, we would hope, would be for general operating support. And then we hope that you would use those dollars in a way that supported your organization in whatever way it needed, whether that's general staff salaries or infrastructure support or actual programmatic pieces.
Thank you. And what if someone's work falls under 2 or more priority areas?
We love it even more. No, we love it equally. So we would be really happy to have you indicate in the application that you feel like you fall under multiple areas. I will say we'll be looking for that too when we do our reads. So even if you miss checking off an area that you fit into, we'll be looking for that as well. And we'll make sure that we're holding that space together. But please mark all of the areas that you believe you're a fit for.
Great. And then moving into policy and advocacy work, how does that fall under or outside of or in addition to the priority areas?
It definitely is something that we support. As I mentioned before, we don't support C4s. So that would be something that would be precluded, but C3 activity around policy and advocacy, including lobbying up to the appropriate limits, all fair game in this work. So you're doing advocacy work around eviction prevention. Have at it. Tell us all about it. We want to see it, especially because of our focus on constituent-led work. There's going to be plenty of places that policy and advocacy are going to show up in this grant round.
Great. These next questions are specific to some of the priority areas. So starting with workforce development, that could mean a lot of different things. So could you provide a little bit more detail on workforce development, including, for instance, servicing adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities within that work? Just a little bit more on that section.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, we're purposely leaving it broad. The idea is not to tell you what we think the community needs from a workforce development perspective, but for you to tell us what the community needs. So, using the example that was included in the question, if you're working with folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, and you're working with them around, what their workforce needs are, and they're helping to inform the way that your programs are running, the way that systems are working. Those are the kinds of things that we want to see, and we would welcome an application that included that. And we anticipate that there will be lots of different populations that will come in the door from the workforce development perspective, as well as a number of our other issue areas.
Thank you. Regarding education, can you elaborate what TDF means when it says bringing about reform?
What we mean in particular is really looking at the system, the school system, and thinking about what change may need to happen to enhance racial equity within the system. I think the thing that's important to keep in mind on this one is that it's not so much service related, so not necessarily providing additional different services within the education system, as so much as looking at changes in the systemic occurrences that are happening in the system. So think about it in that way.
Great, thank you. The next question is about environment and climate. So for instance, would reducing carbon footprints like providing bicycles fit in our new priority area?
I need to think about that. I think there would be an argument to be made around some of the air quality components as it related to bicycles. Again, we would want to be sure that particular priority was one that was coming up from community, was being driven by community, and that was the solution that the community felt was, kind of most critical and most effective in that space.
Great, thank you. We have, in terms of housing, we have two questions. So would we consider 24/7 shelters within our homeless initiative? And does housing apply also to sober housing in recovery from abuse programs, substance abuse?
So the first question was around 24/7 shelters.
Correct.
So yes, we would consider that. Again, thinking specifically about what are the solutions relating to homelessness. How are you working with the folks who are in your shelter? What does that look like? In terms of housing for people who have been engaged in substance misuse, I mean, that's certainly a population that is really important in the range of people experiencing homelessness. So I can't think why there would be a preclusion on that particular population. So certainly we would want to hear your thoughts and your ideas, and the thoughts and ideas that come from the folks that you're serving.
Great. The last priority area question is, could immigrant rights advocacy work fit within economic opportunity, even if that organization does not directly work on economic opportunity?
I would need to understand more about what you're thinking individually. So that's one that I would ask for you to reach out and we can have a little bit more conversation about it. My mind's not kind of making a straight line jump there, but that doesn't mean that there's not a straight line jump. So why don't you reach out after and we can just have a little bit more dialogue about that.
Great. These next two questions are about leadership. Is LGBTQ-led organizations a priority within the Denver Foundation?
LGBTQIA+ organizations are valued by the Denver Foundation, and also so not taken into account in the same way that BIPOC-led organizations are taken into account. Our racial equity priority is one that's fundamental in the foundation's new strategic framework. So we absolutely value that leadership in organizations and that work in organizations. We want to see it, we want to support it, we want to fund it, and it doesn't have the same place that BIPOC-led does for the foundation right now.
And within these priority areas, how important is leadership development?
In terms of, I'm sorry, I'm asking you, Genevieve, like you asked the question. I'm just trying to clarify the question. So I'm going to take it as leadership development of the constituents that you're working with, because that's what we've been talking so much about. It's important. It's important because people need skills to be able to advocate for the things that impact their lives. And oftentimes organizations that they're working with have the capacity and the capability to help develop those skills alongside those leaders. So we like to see that. That's an important component of constituent leadership.
Great. We do have a question about our program. Well, we did talk about program officers, just as a reminder, are available anytime to talk about these, but just that they may not have much more information than we've discussed on this call, because we're trying to leave it open as much to be led and supported by you, telling us what you need most in each community. One of the upcoming questions that we have is just a reminder that if you do receive funding from one of the other funds here at the Denver Foundation, you can still be eligible for the CGP program. And can you provide some examples of what you would consider activity that would bring about education reform in schools?
Well, I mean, I think the foundation, the place that the foundation has funded most deeply in the past has been around school to prison pipeline work. You may have heard of our Common Sense Discipline Initiative that went on for, a period of 4 or 5 years, supported organizations deeply that were doing organizing work, community organizing work, that were working with school leadership, school boards, really talking about the kind of policy and practice that existed and exists in schools. And, and so in some cases, there's the work that happened around the SROs in the city of Denver. That was something that the Denver Foundation supported work on for a number of years. We did a lot of work. We supported a lot of work in the Aurora Public School District. So I think it's that kind of range of, I think of kind of inside work within a system and outside work from an organizing perspective, kind of coming together and happening across a district that's creating change as it relates to racial equity in districts themselves.
Great. Those are the questions for today.
Thank you. Well, thanks to everyone for being a part of this conversation today. We really appreciate you making the time for us and the time to spend learning and asking and thinking about this. We're really hopeful that this has been helpful to you as you're thinking about the possibility of submitting an application. We'll be sending out the PowerPoint as well as a recording of this session for you all to have at your disposal. Please do feel free to be in touch with us if we answered your question and you have further questions. If you didn't get your question answered and you need a little bit more, or you just think of something after this session, we'd be happy to be in conversation with you. And we'll look forward, for those of you that feel like you're a good fit for the Denver Foundation, to reading your to reading your proposals. So thank you again, and we'll talk with you all soon.